So the music industry has changed so much since the 70s, and those giant arena days, and musicians now, I believe, from what I learned from speaking with a lot of career musicians like yourself, now primarily draw their incomes from touring, not so much the sale of the music. How have these changes influenced you as a career musician?
That's a very difficult question to answer, because, of course, there are always, the stars of the moment, and some of them remain at the forefront of their career and so on, and big names and so on, and singers especially, and rappers, of course, now. You take a Dr. Dre, who can release in one day 56 million downloads of a song or a rap song or whatever. It's absolutely phenomenal. It's fantastic. Now, of course, the operation, like you said, the operation to tour is a very, very, very sophisticated and very pointed kind of business, and it has to have a large infrastructure of organization to be able to do that for certain artists, And like the other day, I even went to see Toto and Yes in a hall which was not more than 3,500 people, which is really small for two groups of that status, But it was fantastic, and the way it was organized. Would you believe that I was invited to the show? I was not even able to go and see the guys from Toto, whom I knew personally, because to come out from the seat and to go backstage, they were already gone to the next town for their next show, And I wanted to say hello to Lenny Castro, who is actually part of the. Yeah, and he plays on 6 of those cuts, and they're already gone. That was unbelievable. But the only thing I eventually noticed as well is that when there's of course so many people, so many fans who have bought tickets and so on. I know that in a small hall like that, the sound system was not as it is generally in the first 20 rows, and that was really interesting to see that on the right of the stage there was the monitoring mixer and the people mixing monitoring, and on the left of the stage was the mixer of the hall sound. The sound in the hall, and I was wondering how they could actually determine exactly how good, and how precise the sound was, being on the side of the stage instead of in front of the band, 20 rows further back.
And it's interesting, right? It's like doing the sound of a hall in layers.
Yeah.
Now, you've played, of course, to audiences in excess of 125,000 people, as we know from the days with Yes and Moody Blues, and are you ever prepared for that type of a reception? To step out onto a stage in front of 125,000 people.
Well, it's a very gradual kind of operation. Once you start, and you certainly know that yourself, once you start doing concerts, you start in clubs, and then you play in small theaters and so on. And at the time, it was just a very gradual kind of thing. But having also participated as an audience member in some of the big festivals, actually that's what makes me decide to become a musician. Is it's not that I'm not an agoraphobic person, but I could have sensed that I would be much more comfortable on the stage in front of 100,000 people in the future than amongst them as a listener in the audience, you know. Even if I were in the first row or the 20th row or the 100th row in the stadium, you know. And that really helped me make my decision. That's what I want to do. I want to be a musician on the stage.
Yes. You know, when I was thinking about doing this interview, it's only natural because, you know, Yes was such a gigantic part of not just my own personal, you know, musical exploration in history, but, you know, of the 70s. I mean, it was huge. So it was natural to think that, you know, we were going to delve into some questions about Yes, but I didn't want to go there too much because, you know, I wanted this to focus a little more on you, your creative process, what you're doing now. But I had to borrow some of it, and I was reading. I was on your site, and I saw a very moving tribute to Chris Squire that you wrote there. And you referenced a little bit of what you were speaking of before, where you had this incredible synergy with them when you would play, and I was very moved by that. I thought it was very poignant and touching.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and it's exactly what I was feeling when I received the news, and that's what came to my mind instantly. You know, what I wrote, even if it appeared a couple of days after it passed, but you know, that's I wrote that very in one burst of my hand to the paper via the pen. You know, I wrote it down, and just like that, and I had this empathy with Chris. I mean, it's not always like that, you know, with some musicians, but most of the musicians I've been able to play with, whether it was a Chris Squire or a Ray Gomez or Jeff Berlin or of course an Alphonse Mouzon and Newman, all these guys, you know, I've always had this kind of extreme, what I would call an elevated empathy, and that is creating a special bond between us, between musicians, which defies all the laws of gravity, and you know, and it goes much further than that even, you know, and that's what really makes a difference between certain musicians and others to put together.
Yeah, there's a bond. Steve Hackett, who we've actually interviewed 2 times for the site. He's a wonderful interview, but he also had a chance to work with Chris as well, and he said the same sorts of things, you know, and he wrote a little tribute as well. And he just, it sounds like he was a very special person to be involved with.
Yeah. I know Steve pretty well. Of course, I met him on the cruise to the Edge last year. But it's funny you should mention him specifically today, because I just received that, I mean, you know, an hour ago from the authors of a great study book about human nature and social psychology, and you know, Steve Hackett and I are actually on the first page of that book.
How interesting is that? Right?
Doing the plug. Maybe if I have your email address, I'll be able to send you that just the few first pages. But we are on the very first page, and I just received it now.
How's that for synchronicity?
But Chris, I mean, to come back to Chris Squire, he was a very special person. I mean, he was really living in his own kingdom, and he was really like a pioneer into his own style of playing the bass. And I remember that even though he was not, you know, a classically trained musician or even you know, I mean, those kind of guys, especially in England, you know. They just it's just an imperative, you know. Their career is what I call imperative, because it's like it comes as it goes, and it develops as it goes, and they form their own style. And I remember that he was able to, in French we would say, décortiquer. He was able to skin kind of a piece of music to the point of being able to completely rearrange it with us in terms of making it more a contrapuntic kind of piece, as opposed to just chords, and his bass was really part of that counterpoint and harmony and counterpoint, as opposed to just chordal kind of accompaniment that normally just bass players do generally,
Yeah.
And funny enough, in the piece, I mean, talking about Mark very quickly, in the piece which I wrote called Alien Intelligence, I think it's at 2 minutes 18, if my memory serves me right. But there's 1 minute of a bass solo I did on one of my keyboards, and when I was re-listening to it, at the time, of course, Chris was with the he was in great shape, no health problem or whatever. But I was always thinking about him when I composed that, when I played that piece, actually on my keyboard. And of course, the blend, the rest of the part with the bassist, with John Avila. But there's just that 1 minute which I did, and I always said I would love to be able to dedicate this minute of of my own bass playing, to his memory.
That's wonderful. And you know what? Knowing a little bit about your musical background and what interests you in music, mainly with in regards to percussion, I could see why his style of bass playing would be so attractive to you, because it's almost like a percussive attack of the instrument, the way he plays it. You could almost take the drums away. It's that rhythmic.
Absolutely, and also what I have noticed, of course, I don't know if, of course, that's a very, very specific thing that we musicians would be able to notice, immediately. But all his playing was always with a plectrum. And to be able to do this rhythmic accents and to play that rhythmically just only with the plectrum, he never played with his fingers, with his right hand.
Right.
He was always with the plectrum, and it's a very, very difficult. That's why he developed this incredible style, which is very, very personal to Chris Squire, because there's a lot of bass players. I mean, the majority of bass players can, of course, use a plectrum, but they play with their fingers, And
right.
when they play that, what we call the slap or whatever, you cannot do it with the plectrum like he did. So he never did really what I would call a slap style, but he had this rhythmic impulses and dynamic, which was clearly defined by the fact that he was using a plectrum always.
Now, you've also done some work in the area of producing as well, correct, for your studios?
Yeah.
Some producers or musicians that cross over into producing, I always find very interesting, because of what they generally bring to the table in a session. So some producers are very forceful with their vision, and some are very non-intrusive. How would you describe your style as a producer? How would you describe it?
Well, it also has to do with probably the morality of politics and the upbringing of a musician. I'm very Swiss, really, and for me, neutrality has always been at the core of my beliefs, and peace as well. Mm-hmm. So I love an interaction between artists and musicians and so on, I'm not giving up easily on an idea or agreeing easily if there's some aspect of a disagreement. But generally speaking, it's always a very, very kind of gentle. There's never any forcefulness in what I'm doing with other people in the studio and other musicians and so on. And of course, it has to do also with the fact that, you know, either it works or it doesn't. I mean, you know, first and foremost, of course, nowadays we work a lot with machines in studios, and we can do that. There's always a possibility to adjust, you know, timings and dynamics and so on. But that is the prime concern, is that everything works perfectly, imbricated, rhythmically, first and foremost. And then after that, of course, the colors and the array of different sounds and the sonic aspect and of course the elements of constructivity in a piece of music are extremely important. Also the vocals, you know, very important, you know. But generally, no forcefulness at all in the studio. For example, I don't think I would have been able to work with, I don't know if I'm even dare mention his name, but, you know, a great producer who was extremely successful, but Phil Spector, for example. I don't think I would have been happy in the studio with him.
To control.
However, oh yeah. I mean, to a point that probably I think producers we've worked with, whether it was especially with Moody's, you know, the Dick Williams or Tony Visconti, excellent producers, excellent guys, and there was always a very, very good empathy with them. When I was with Yes, of course, the whole group, all the guys, you know, whether it was John Anderson, Alan and Steve and Chris together in the studio, that was already forming a very, very strong block of producers, you know, so to speak. And Eddie Offord was extremely skillful in what he was doing. So sometimes there were a few very agitated kind of discussions in the studio, and I remember even on the sessions of Relayer, I remember having been able to witness at some late nights mixing sessions about 8 hands on the 56 channel mixer that Eddie Offord used to use, you know, instead of 2 hands. You know, because everybody wanted to have the instrument louder and so on, and you know, it was very, very funny in a way. You know? Very strange.
Well, everybody has this idea, I guess, of where they want that gigantic wall of sound to go. You know, what direction. But you know, and you know, on a personal note with that, I just would like to just add that your work on that album is just sublime. It's just incredible, and I think Relayer would not be Relayer without you. I mean, that whole evolution of Yes would not be there, and just thank you. It's great. Thanks for the memories.
Well, I really appreciate that. You know, I mean, it was a really, really big challenge, especially, you know, coming to the group in at the end of the first at the end of the first week of August. I remember it so well because, you know, Nixon was resigning. He was on TV. Although we were in the UK, we were in London. I was visiting, of course, John Anderson, who didn't live far away from where I was, and every day, the very few days of that end of the week and the week after, and then we started to record and be at Chris's studio in Buckinghamshire. And I remember that even the introduction to Sound Chaser was actually recorded in the very barn where I had been invited on that afternoon of the first week. I think it was a Wednesday afternoon of that first week of August. They played me the part of the song of Sound Chaser, which they had already, of course, composed and written and rehearsed. And I was absolutely flabbergasted. I was in the middle of the four of them, and they were playing at a speed and a wall of sound coming from all directions. I mean, you're talking about much more than 5.1 there, you know. And I was like, they played me that part of the song, and then they asked me what I would come up with as an introduction to that song. So that's exactly what I did. I played that on the road, which was in the studio. I think that road belongs actually to Vangelis. I think some of his keyboards have been there for like a couple of weeks, because they have tried to play with him for a few
I read that story, that you actually auditioned it on keyboards that were left, because whatever the political reasons. But I don't get that, because Relayer certainly would not have turned out the way it did if Vangelis had played, because in my mind he's much too sedate. I hear like something else would have come out of that. Maybe something more like Topographic Oceans, but not Relayer. Relayer is a real tour de force. It's very edgy, very, very edgy.
Right. I agree with you. However, it was probably very good for Vangelis.
True.
Because he was able to, he stayed in the UK without any problems, and he was able to actually interact with all these filmmakers, and and what he did. I mean, that was. I knew Vangelis before that as a composer and as a musician from Paris. He was in Paris with Vangelis Papadanatou. He was playing. He had Aphrodite Child, the group Aphrodite Child, and they were already big stars in France. And I remember he had an array of keyboards which were completely different than anybody else's keyboard. He used echoes machines, echoplexes, extremely skillfully, but he had some time. I think some of his keyboards were linked to 3 or 4 different echoplex, and that's why the sounds were always kind of echoing, in space, and that was his style,
Yeah, they were extra spacey for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think Vangelis is a fantastic composer, and he has still now a recognition and a career that is absolutely fantastic, and I think that's because of what happened and the fact that. I'm sure they played with him for a good week, and of course, John loved Vangelis and said maybe he couldn't really fit in, especially as you said, within the confines of Relayer, which was very, very complex and very, very fast and very rhythmic. And very contrapuntic and demanded an extreme, a high level of discipline to play. Especially, talking about 40 years ago. But when I came up with the introduction to Sound Chaser, I just did it there and then. Then I explained, of course, the rhythm. The answers to Chris and Alan, they rehearsed it for a few minutes, and I think after 25 minutes we had that whole introduction in the can, and Eddie Offord recorded it there and then on the spot in that barn. That was not recorded at Chris's studio. That was recorded during that audition that day, that Wednesday. I remember that.